For those of you who've just joined, welcome. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat. You can state your name, the country you're from, and the name of your organization or institution. This webinar is how to conduct value chain assessments in the Horticulture for Development Professional Series, and we will get started in just a few minutes. All right, we will go ahead and get started now. Thank you all for joining the second webinar in the Horticulture for Development Professional Series on how to conduct horticulture value chain assessments. This series is focused on providing professional development for researchers, students, practitioners, and others interested in the intersections between horticulture and international development. Webinars will be scheduled every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time through September 19th. As you may be aware, we are offering certificates for the series to participants who attend all 9 webinars. I would like to take a moment to introduce the organizing entity of these webinars. The Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Horticulture, or the Horticulture Innovation Lab, is a global research network that advances fruit and vegetable innovations, empowering smallholder farmers to earn more income while better nourishing our communities. We are based at the University of California, Davis, and have been funded by USAID for 10 years to conduct horticulture research, and currently have about 22 projects in 14 different countries throughout the world. We decided to do this series because horticulture is a critical aspect of addressing malnutrition and obesity, while also creating wealth, especially for women, youth, and other marginalized populations. Over the 9 webinars, including this one, we hope to pass along the lessons we have learned, help build capacity in project management, and promote the importance of fruits and vegetables globally. My name is Kyle Friedman, and I will be your host for this series. I'm a graduate researcher for the Horticulture Innovation Lab. I previously worked at RTI International, managing large donor-funded food security and agriculture projects. And I look forward to getting to know you all throughout this series and have chatted with some of you in the first webinar. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our presenter. Participants will be muted during the presentation. For any questions you have, please submit those in the Q&A section of your Zoom control bar. We will address questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to ask those along the way. There will also be a brief survey at the end of this session, and we would greatly value your feedback, so please be sure to complete that. Our presenter today is Rashmi Ekka. Rashmi is a post-harvest programs manager for Agribusiness Associates based in Davis, California, and has successfully led horticulture value chain assessments in Rwanda and Burkina Faso as a project manager for Horticulture Innovation Lab research projects. She has nearly a decade of experience in strategy and international development consulting, and has a great presentation prepared for you today. Rashmi, take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. So good morning, everybody. We're here in Davis, California today, but I do understand that we have people logging in from different parts of the world. So thank you so much for getting on this webinar. From the different time zones. I understand it's probably evening for some of you folks, so we'll try to keep this quick and interesting. So just a few words about me, because you don't get to see me in person, just my slides. I'm Rashmi Ekka again, as Kyle said. Currently, I work for Agribusiness Associates as their post-harvest programs manager. And through the Horticulture Innovation Lab, we've done 2 projects in the past 3 years. One of them has been in Rwanda, where we focused on reducing post-harvest losses in just horticulture generally, so many different fruits and vegetables. And the second one was in Burkina Faso, where we worked specifically in tomatoes. Previously, I used to work with Connexus Corporation, which was known as AZMJ. That's where I got my agricultural value chain chops, as you may call it. And I'm also an independent consultant now. I have my consulting firm called Sal International. And through that, I've been working for Catholic Relief Services in Ethiopia. I mentioned these 3 organizations because the bulk of my methodology and learning and way of thinking about horticulture value chain assessments come from these 3. So with that, let me just give a little outline of what we can expect to talk about in the next hour and a half or so. We use the value chain approach, the USAID value chain approach, to do the value chain assessments, but horticulture has different concerns from agriculture. It has its own unique features. So what I will present today is a hybrid methodology that we have been using. So do excuse me if some of you are, already familiar with value chain analysis, and there's some of that in here, but I will try to focus more on the horticulture aspects. But I will still give a full overview for those who are coming new to the entire topic of value chain assessments. So with that, the first thing I want to introduce is, what is a value chain? And I would say the simplest way of thinking about a value chain is to think about how a product is created. So on this graphic, if you see, it starts from input supplies, that's seeds and fertilizers. It moves up to production, where we have growers using those seeds and fertilizers to grow a certain crop. And then it moves up the chain to a buyer who may be aggregating the produce and moving it up to the next level, where you may have a bigger buyer, or you may have a processor. A processor may be just doing packaging and cleaning and grading, or they may be converting the product into, a dried food or some sort of a paste. And then it goes closer to the market. It may go to the national wholesale market and then to retail, or it may be exported. The primary idea behind the value chain is that value is added up as you move from, one level of the chain up to the next. And so at each step, the whatever conversion that the product goes through is an addition in value. So I like to think of that. It's the reason we call it a value chain. Okay. So why should we use a value chain approach? The value chain approach, seeks to understand the different companies that operate within the industry, all the way from the input suppliers all the way to the end market buyers. So it gives a really nice framework to sort of immediately think about a certain crop. Our way of looking at value chain analysis has been expanding, and now it also includes a market systems perspective. A lot of folks may still be confused about the difference between market systems and value chain approach. Without getting into the nuances of that too much, all I want to say is value chain is included or encompassed within the market systems approach, which looks at the entire dynamic space, not at just one crop, but all of the other, actors, resources, relationships that may be influencing the whole market, not just one crop. The value chains also focus a lot on end markets, and that is a principle which says, be more demand oriented. Look at where the opportunities are, where the markets are, and then try to serve those markets. So many times what is being grown and what the market wants may be different. So when we reorient towards end markets, then, all the value chain players can expect to have higher returns because they are more in line with market demands. The third reason is, for using a value chain approach is to understand the role of value chain governance. When we say governance, we mean that within a certain chain, there are different power dynamics, different interfirm relationships. And there's a huge component of trust and past history of honoring contracts, or having good relationships or bad relationships. When we look at a value chain and try to upgrade it, it's important to realize who may be the leaders or the lead firms in the value chain, and bring them in so they can be influential in facilitating the evolution of the value chain. And lastly, the value chain approach really honors different relationships and the importance of relationships and the quality of relationships. When actors work cooperatively, we notice that, they're more mutually beneficial relationships instead of opportunistic rent-seeking type of behavior. Going to the next thing. So what role does value chain approach play in a program design, or, where would you do a value chain assessment? And I would say you do it right up front. The first thing you do when you start a project in agriculture is to try to uncover the root causes of whatever the performance issues are. And that's where the value chain analysis would come in, and you would start this way of thinking. And then that would be reflected in your, initial strategy that you have. And then you would go into a participatory iterative design, and then monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, you would plan for exit. So it's doing a value chain analysis at the very beginning of your work is really important, because it gives you your sort of final direction of your interventions. So the different steps in value chain analysis just broadly are, and I will go deeper into each of these, are desk review. The second is stakeholder listening, which may primarily just be farmers, because for a lot of projects, the farmers are the primary focus group. Value chain prioritization, in which you may have a geographic boundary within which you're working, and within that you can look at which value chains you want to select and prioritize. And then once you know that you're working on the right crops, you can do the mapping and analysis, and based on that analysis you can make the development strategy. Now, compared to agriculture, horticulture has its own unique character, because of which needs extra and very specific analysis. And for me, the defining feature for this difference is, most of horticulture in developing countries is characterized by very high food loss. Fruits and vegetables are perishable, especially if they are not processed very quickly near the source. For example, tomatoes, we have found in Rwanda and in Burkina Faso, over 50% of tomatoes are lost. So as the tomatoes start moving from the farm towards the final retail, almost half of it just goes bad. So this high level of loss, it starts mostly at the post-harvest level, but also production practices play into this high loss. And so since this is such a huge value loss and quantity loss, it's very important to include that in the value chain analysis. So one of the main ways in which we do this is a methodology called Commodity Systems Assessment Methodology. So what I'll do now is run through the steps as I've sort of presented them, the value chain analysis steps and the commodity system assessment methodology steps, and show you how we put the two together. We do use interdisciplinary teams to do this assessment, so you have the full big picture. Okay, so the first step, going to the desk review. This is, you would review the Ministry of Agriculture strategic plans. Usually there are 5-year or 10-year plans. Similarly, USAID as well as other donors may put out an ag plan for the country. It's also very helpful to read project reports of current as well as, past projects. And see what work has been done in the crops over there. And you could learn a lot about the market landscape. And then generally just Google and see other papers and assessments done in the horticulture sector for that country. Be warned though, fruits and vegetables is, it's definitely something that is just very recently coming onto the radar for a lot of different countries as well as projects. In the past, the focus has been more on grains, on maize. Very few projects have a strong development focus on horticulture. So you may not find a lot of material already out there, or a lot of people who've been working in horticulture. You may find that government horticulture departments are very thinly staffed, or just the level of human resources within horticulture is low. Okay. The next step is stakeholder listening. If your primary target group is farmers, is growers, I think it's really important to hear the voice of the farmers so that you have, farmer-centered design in your project. So that's a photo of me at a farmer focus group in Ethiopia. And what we like to do is, if there is a cooperative or just an informal farmers marketing group or even a savings group, bring them together and learn from them about what's happening in their region. Really important things to get to know are, what are their profiles? What is the family size? What is the land size? What kinds of crops they're growing? What is the demand? Ask them how much they spend each season, how much they make each season, so you have an idea of their profitability. We ask questions on what their challenges are. They'll normally speak about the pests, the input supply problem they have. A lot of times maybe seeds are not available, seeds are expensive, seeds are not high quality or characterized or adapted for their region. You may learn about their production practices, which may be traditional and can be improved. You can learn about their post-harvest storage, or if they have any ability to storage, as well as how their organization leads to having increased negotiation power. So you can ask about that, as well as their access to markets. In very rural areas, you may just hear that they don't really have access to markets. They have traveling traders who come by and buy their produce and move on. So they don't know where their produce ends up, as well as access to finance. You may hear that, there's one bank or a microfinance institution, or they're just using their savings group and so on. So yeah, it's really important to just get to know them and their challenges and how they're participating in the market. It's also good to travel through that area, especially if you're new to that country, but make sure your team really knows what the roads are like, because that influences movement of product. The electricity supply, mobile technology, and internet is very important if you want to have an intervention which looks into digital finance or digital agriculture extension. I also find it important with smallholder farmers, specifically, to know if they have any non-farm income, because that helps to know if they are diversified, if they're going to have a lean season, and And lenders also like to see another source of income. And lastly, it's important to ask questions related to climate change. Many smallholder farmers are affected by droughts as well as flash floods, and also to see the role of gender relations, as well the participation of youth and social inclusion. And I say social inclusion to mean any kinds of minorities that are there in that geographic location. Moving to the next, this is a value chain selection and prioritization. A lot of projects don't get to do this because it's already dictated in the proposal. But if you do, I think it's really great because it helps you get a really good sense from your team, from the market, and from the farmers and other value chain actors on which are the right value chains to work on. So I did this with CRS in Ethiopia, where we did a large workshop, brought in many different stakeholders, used the input that we had from the farmers through the farmer focus groups, and then looked at the different crops that was being grown in this region, and ranked them by different impact indicators and feasibility indicators. So this is what the impact matrix looks like. And these indicators are just sort of example indicators. This is what we use, but they can totally be changed, keeping in mind the mandate of your project. So for impact, we looked at nutrition, what the profitability could be, if the crop is climate resilient, because we were working in a very dry, arid, semi-arid area in Ethiopia. If the crop is youth-friendly, gender-friendly, if there's a potential for jobs, creation of jobs. By influence sector, we meant, does this crop have influence over others? Can it just, working on this crop, influence the rest of the market? If it was a strong crop for food security, and then what was the potential for scaling this crop? So in the workshop, I think we had like 40 people, and we had a long list of different fruits and vegetables, as well as cereals and spices. And people got into groups and took one crop at a time and scored them according to these indicators, and then we got it ranked. And then that's how we ended up choosing the ones that we wanted to work on. The second list of indicators that we had was on feasibility, and this goes more to that organization's abilities, internal abilities, as well as some external factors, which would make it easy or hard to work in these certain crops. So we looked at, what the presence was, if there were other value chain services, what the market demand was, if there were other partners, if it was aligned with the government policy, etc. I share this just as an idea or a way to collaboratively be able to select the value chains. And using this approach, I've realized, is a process of building buy-in. When a project starts working on a crop, you have to start networking and facilitating people and building a strong relationships. And this activity is sort of a good, early step, which makes the stakeholders feel that their voice was heard and they are, part of your work from the very beginning. Instead of just coming in and saying, hey, we're going to work in sweet potatoes or in cabbage or whatever crop you choose, this helps everybody's voice be heard. And then I feel like you have the right ones for that region. So then we get into mapping and analysis. Once you have your crops that you want to work on, what we normally do is map key informants, interview key informants, and then map the value chain and analyze the value chain. And you can, it's not as linear as that. Sometimes you may make a simple map, and then, as you talk to the key informants, your map will get more complex. But there are two types of key informants that you should interview. And the first one is market participants. So these are value chain actors. And that first image on the left hand and the right hand, upper right hand, you can see, how the product moves, like farmer, then local trader, there may be another trader, wholesaler, processing, retail. That's could be what the value chain looks like. So just follow up the value chain. I would actually start from the input supplier and then just interview all of the different levels and at least have the core market participants in. And that photo on the bottom right, you can see that's part of the assessment team that was interviewing an urban retailer in their little vegetable and fruit cart, and just observing their practices and talking to them. You should also interview knowledgeable observers of the market. These can be government officials, especially at the federal, at the central government level, like the Ministry of Agriculture. I would talk with the Horticulture Department, the Irrigation Department, Input Supplies Department, access to finance, as well as at the state level, depending on what if you're working nationwide or in a specific geographic region. It's also helpful to talk to other projects, see what value chains they're working on, what they think about the ones you're working on, and where you may be able to find some synergies. And lastly, apex organizations. These might be different associations, so farmer, associations at the federal level, trader associations, export associations. They give you a large market picture. So a value chain mapping exercise. Again, I like to do this in a workshop format. All of these workshops, they don't have to be large, but it's really nice to have the assessment team and then a few other people who are working in the value chain are really helpful to have them included in the mapping exercise. If you do your mapping on your own with just sort of the information that you're getting from the field, it's possible that you may miss out on some crucial relationship and the quality of those relationships. So in a mapping exercise, these are the questions that are sort of the most important to ask and have them answered. So the first is, we usually pull up a big flip chart and give people markers, and then they start drawing it out. And a good way just to go from like input supplies all the way to the market and then fill it out. So identify all the value chain actors. And then once you draw that out, you can start putting in different business development service providers, including access to finance, research. The government is doing, has some projects or services. It's important to map the flow of the product. Sometimes you will see when the chain is very fragmented, the product is just changing many hands, but not moving very far. So it's good to be able to see that. Note how the prices are increasing as you're moving up the chain, and also ask as you're doing the mapping, you know, what are the challenges, what is missing, what relationships are not working, what is the opportunity here. We also map external influences like economic forces, political and legal forces, socio-cultural forces. For example, recently I was working on poultry in Ethiopia, and I was told that there's a dead chicken problem. And I was like, what's that problem? And obviously people don't like to eat chicken that's already been killed and packaged. They want to butcher it on its own. So that, you know, creates a little bit of a problem when you're trying to upgrade the value chain. And it can also be environmental and technological forces that are important to consider. So this is an example of a value chain that we mapped in Ethiopia. I just want to show you what a final picture may look like. There are many different ways of mapping. You'll see that, you know, some maps look different, but they have largely the same information. In the center, I have mapped the flow of product and all the different value chain actors. And on the right-hand side, I've mapped more of the enablers and the supporters of the different levels of the chain. I want to get more into the commodity systems assessment methodology, so I'll kind of move a little bit fast through this section. Once you have the mapping done, what I normally do is go back and analyze all of the interview data, all of the product flows, the price increases, and then I start zoning into what are the problems, what are the challenges that this value chain is facing, and start working with the assessment team on what the you know, what are the primary insights we're getting and what could be the possible opportunities and resulting you know, program interventions that can be put into place to resolve those challenges. So with that, we would move into the commodity systems assessment methodology. Usually when the value chain analysis is going on, we do the commodity systems assessment methodology at the same time. It may be good to have a specific person on the assessment team who would be just asking the CSAM questions, because they also do sampling on the field. So I wanted to show you this graphic on the right-hand side, which walks through all of the different pre and post-harvest related issues that lead to those huge losses, you know, leads to that high perishability that we have. And this image shows those different points at which loss can happen. So first off, it can be in poor production and planning. Farmers often don't have the right information about what the market demands, or the time at which it demands, or the quality at which, you know, the demand is, and so there can be poor planning. At the pre-production level, what often happens is there's lack of information, or, you know, good agricultural practices, poor roads or poor infrastructure in general, which prevents input supplies from being delivered in a timely manner. And then, you know, so the production doesn't go very well. In production, again, bad agricultural practices can lead to higher disease burden. During harvest, the main issues would be noticed in the field is wrong time for harvest. For instance, with tomatoes, we see that they're harvested too late. In transportation, there's a lot of physical damage that happens to the produce, mostly from heat and lack of temperature control. Actually, temperature control starts from the field itself and is a problem till it's, in cold storage at the end market or has been processed into something else. And so the problem sort of continues into when it goes to packing and transportation, storage, processing. So that's kind of what I discussed. Out of all of these different pain points, I have 4 that I think are really key. And then, the first of that is at the wrong time for harvest. So what we have at the Horticulture Innovation Lab are these maturity indices. And they tell us what would be the right time to harvest depending on, how much more the product has to travel. Usually product is picked too late is already overripe. So as it starts traveling, it just gets very damaged, squashed, it rots. The next is, I point to physiological damage over here, but my point is more around temperature control. Being able to control food temperature is the main way that we can protect it. Anything under 4 to 8 degrees Celsius is good for most fruits and vegetables, but it depends on what it is, and the ideal conditions need to be maintained. The third one out of this big list is poor packaging. We notice a lot of times that product is being moved in these huge crates or, traditional big baskets. They're 100, 150 kgs, and then the product just gets totally squashed. And then last one is that production planning. And this is sort of lack of market. When you don't plan for the production correctly, what may happen is when you have the harvest, you may not have a market. If you don't have a market, your product is rotting in the field or in the barn, then you may just need to dump it. And that's a huge pain point. So these are the components for the CSAM, as we call it, the Commodity Systems Assessment Methodology. And they have questionnaires for these 26 components that you see on this wheel. And it's very nicely arranged, from pre-production, production, post-harvest handling, and marketing. I have the link to the CSAM guide, the methodology. You can pull that up, and it's really great because it just tells you it has a questionnaire for each of these components. And you can just work through the questionnaire, ask those questions, and you'll have all of the value chain related information that you need for the, mostly focusing on the post-harvest part of the equation. So this is really great. I will not delve deeper into what each of these questionnaires are, but you can get them off of the manual. So putting it all together, this is the case of Rwanda, where we did both the value chain analysis as well as the commodity systems assessment methodology. The methodology has 2 parts to it. Outside of those 26 components, there's also a measurement component. So as the assessment team is working through the questionnaire and when they're visiting the field, they also take field samples. So they start from the farm and they start sampling all the way till the end market. And what they sample for includes the weight of the produce, how much of it is bad. We see different types of damage, physical as well as physiological. We look at the temperature, the pulp temperature and the outside ambient temperature. We look at humidity levels. So we even look at the bricks content. And this is again included in the manual. where you will see, what has to be measured. And then that, as you collect all that information from every different market actor, as it moves from the farm to the retail, you'll be able to quantify what the losses are. And that's how we get the loss figures. So putting, those two things together, the value chain and the CSAM, and CSAM having two sides, the questions as well as the quantifying of losses, we get to this picture. So the value chain in tomatoes in Rwanda, we noticed is that the sales and distribution was very fragmented. And you see how there's these local markets and traders, and it's kind of just goes round and round at the sort of local regional level for a bit before it ends up at the urban retail. And we noticed, our assessment showed that the market rewarded big players such as large farmers, and there was not a lot of processing going on. Value-added products such as sauces, jams, ketchups, not really happening in this picture. It's just fresh tomatoes going to market, and only half of it ever reaches there is sort of what we got. On the right-hand side, there's that nifty infographic-y type of graphic where we follow one of the lines. So if you see, or channels, if we see on the left hand, the value chain, we see three channels coming on. One is the middleman, one is the trader, and one is the local market, right? So we followed more of the first one, the middleman to wholesaler channel, where there's a collection point, which is at a regional level, and then from there, the aggregators take it to the wholesale market. Through the CSAM, we see that it takes almost 3 days, 30 hours to get to the retail market. And then at each step, we show how much of a quality loss and a quantity loss there is. You'll notice that the quality loss does not add up to the quantity loss. So, even if 33% of tomatoes are damaged at the first stage, only 21% is actually thrown away. It's discarded. So, mind you, when you go to the grocery store, at a Addis or in Kigali, in what you're going to be picking out, there's a lot of damaged products in there. So you don't just blindly take what's there. You have to choose the pieces you want. So it shows that at the farm level, there's 21% discarded. And then the next point up, it's 11.5% discarded. At the wholesale market, there's 10% discarded. And the retail market, 13% is discarded. So you get to 56% quantitative loss. So when we put all of our findings together from the commodity systems assessment methodology and the value chain recommendations, we sort of find this convergence. And, for tomatoes, we really noted that from the CSAM, that we really needed to work on transportation, on poor quality containers, on the lack of temperature management, on poor handling and rough handling during harvest. That graphic, that photo which shows lack of temperature management, those are tomato sacks which have been covered with dry banana leaves, in case you're wondering what that is. And then the value chain recommendations kind of came through as, promoting the usage of crates. Training was needed on harvesting and post-harvesting best practices. This is mostly around when to pick and how to pick the produce. And then reducing barriers to use for collection centers. There were not really a lot of collection centers happening. Collection centers can really be a place for enforcing quality control. That's where grading, cleaning, and packaging can happen. So we noticed that was a problem. And then also temperature management was a problem. So there was a need for developing and supporting cooling and storage solutions. And lastly, because it seemed that all of the tomatoes was going fresh, we needed to look at processing. So all of this analysis did end up feeding into what we ended up doing for 3 years of the project. This is just a snapshot which sort of directly relates to those findings and those recommendations. So in the first photo, you see we're at a tomato processing facility. I have another 5 minutes or so before I'll wrap up. So if people listening in can start getting their questions ready. I see Kyle here looking at the time. Okay. We wanted to get the processing going in tomatoes in Rwanda, but we didn't want to, directly do it. One of our principles is to facilitate and have long-term sustainability. So what we did is we did a lot of research at our centers on tomato processing and packaging. We developed protocols for it and made it really available. As a second activity, we did an innovation competition where people were invited to put in the ideas for a post-harvest business. And we had this lady, Minga. She decided, she was a food technology graduate, and she decided to make a tomato paste product. So that came into fruition during the life of the project. So now we have locally processed tomatoes in Rwanda. Previously, there was tomato paste available in Rwanda, but it would come from China. The second photo shows farmers using aprons. Those are aprons that we have this concept of harvesting aprons from the Horticulture Innovation Lab, but in Rwanda, the farmers took that design and then designed something using locally available materials. And women especially really like using these aprons because it's easier for them to move around with these aprons versus using basins or little baskets in the field. And also the quality of tomatoes stays really high. The third one, where you can see the boxes, that's actually in a cold room. That's a CoolBot powered cold room. We did a lot of cold storage work in Rwanda, mostly to show, how you can build a low-cost cold storage, and then encouraging agribusinesses in Rwanda and facilitating their use of this new usage and adoption of this new technology. And then the fourth photo shows crates. We did a lot of work to get crates to Rwanda. There were really no seller of crates. There was a plastics company who could make crates, but we helped an entrepreneur to do the marketing of the crates. And now there are thousands of crates in the horticulture sector in Rwanda, which we believe is reducing the losses a lot, versus the big baskets they were using earlier. I'll move to a list of my best practices or things that I find really helpful when doing these assessments. The first is, really to be participatory, include the stakeholders in each step of the assessment. Your recommendations will not be followed through if people don't agree from them from the very beginning. And it takes a while to build in that buy-in. So it's really important to take people through with you on the journey. The next one is ensure the assessment team and key informants reflect the demographics of the stakeholders, especially women and youth and those who are socially excluded. This is true for a lot of, people who work in agriculture and sometimes even like project staff. When it goes to traveling in rural areas, you'll see that the assessment team can quickly be entirely of men, consisting of men. Horticulture, growing fruits and vegetables, has historically and culturally been a women's activity. And a lot of women who are, a lot of horticulture production, which is moving towards commercialization at a household level, is coming from the kitchen garden. So it's the woman of the family who's the primary person who will be growing, your tomatoes and onions. So it's very important, to have women in the assessment team so that the questions relating to gender are not skirted. And similarly with youth have a huge role in organizing, providing business services like irrigation, and doing a lot of the marketing. It's very important to involve them both in the assessment as well as in the team, as well as those who interview. Having an interdisciplinary team is also really important. This obviously depends on the timeline and the budget that you have, but I find it helpful to have an agronomist and a post-harvest specialist at least. And then, input system, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides are so critical to horticulture. To have someone, a specialist in that area is really important. And then you may have other goals of your project. For example, if it's to, increase access to finance or access to markets, you can have a financial inclusion expert or a market linkages expert. I have another point on participatory approach, and that is, do vet your findings in the final workshop and get stakeholder buy-in. So throughout your assessment, maybe do 3 workshops. So, first would be a selection workshop. A second would be a mapping workshop, and a third would be the sort of final where you present your findings and get everybody on board, the last step. And then the last point I have is when you're planning your interventions, think about the sustainability, think about who's going to continue them after the project ends. And the best way to do that is to make sure that they are carried out by market actors, and the project's role is primarily in facilitation. So with that, I'll wrap up. I have some resource links over here. I think the PDF of this presentation will be made available soon. But you could Google these pretty easily. For the commodity systems assessment methodology, you can find the PDF online, and as well as for the value chain approach and analysis on market links. And with that, I say thank you for listening in. I hope it was informative, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rashmi. Great and really, really interesting presentation. So we'll jump into some questions. I have a couple general ones about value chain assessments just to get the juices flowing. So one is just how often do value chain assessments need to be conducted? And that could be for a given value chain in a particular country. Sort of when do you have to kind of revisit the value chain and do another assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it really depends on what your project objectives are. So for example, when we went into Rwanda and we wanted to do, work in tomatoes, the first step is, just Google tomatoes Rwanda, right? And we saw all of these different recent value chain analysis that had been done, but none of them really got to the post-harvest question. So what ends up happening is like you may end up having a good desk review, things that you can build on top of. And then what you can do is that take that map that's already been created and then start drawing on top of it. So it's possible that you don't have to recreate the whole wheel.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. And another question kind of piggybacking on that. So if you're working in a particular country, have you found in your experience that there's any databases or resources to identify if a value chain assessment has been conducted?
Usually no. I'm able really to find them, through Google searches. USA does have what is it called? The DEC, Development Clearing.
Experience Clearinghouse, yeah.
There you go, Development Experience Clearinghouse. If you can find things on there, but I think it's nice to not, helmet into just one donor, because there are other projects funded by other donors which also do value chain analysis. So usually a Google search will quickly reveal those.
Yeah.
But also when you start talking to government officials and other projects which are in the country, you'll find those reports.
Yeah,
well.
And I was going to say, I think a key component of doing the key informant interviews and that desk review is kind of collaborating, communicating with people within the country to figure out if those have been done. So that's great. A couple questions that we have around the matrices with the different indicators. So one is just about kind of how those matrices are created. So in terms of, is that a collaborative process in which you bring multiple stakeholders together to kind of build out those matrices, and if so, sort of who should attend those?
Okay, the way we did that was CRS had its own value chain manual where they had picked out most of those indicators. Our assessment team, along with the project implementers, looked at what was already there, and then we tweaked it to include a few more indicators that were important to the project, as well as we also tweaked the point system. It's not entirely scientific. We're just sort of allotting 5 points here and 10 points there. But I think what is important is just if you have specific goals for your project, make sure that those are included in the indicators, because you achieve what you measure, and it starts right here. So if you have increasing access to finance as a big thing that needs to be done in the country, then do look at the profitability of all of the different crops and make sure that that's part of the ranking. If a crop is not profitable or very profitable, it's likely not to get financed a lot by bankers. Yeah.
And in your experience with kind of establishing those indicators in the weights, was that something that stakeholders gave input to, or it was something that you and the team kind of put together based on
the way we did it is we had a initial set of indicators and scoring from the project implementation team, and then the morning of the workshop we went over it again with all of the workshop participants, so they felt comfortable with those indicators and those points, and I think a little bit more was changed at that point too. Yeah. Okay.
And in those workshops, was that kind of per group? So did you do a workshop with farmers and then maybe one with NGOs, or did you kind of pull together a diverse group of just general stakeholders in that type of workshop?
Yeah, we pulled together a diverse group of different stakeholders because it's important to have a multi-stakeholder meetings. Whenever you do a workshop, bring different people together so that they can all learn from each other's experiences and they form better relationships. A lot of times relationships in agriculture they're antagonistic because, the farmer always thinks that the trader is cheating the farmer, and then the trader always thinks the wholesaler is cheating them. I mean, there's a huge trust issue and power dynamics in the chain. So the more people you can bring together, more you can facilitate conversations between them and have them working together and driving them towards a common, a shared vision of where the value chain can go, and having, them not just in this identification process, but even the mapping process, right? Like when they see, what a farmer may not have visibility beyond the trader that visits their farm gate. When they have that, not a farmer, but like an association or a cooperative level, it can be very beneficial, to increasing trust.
And just to clarify on the sort of the ranking or weight of those indicators, that was, I guess, how did you come up with those weights? You said it was sort of ad hoc with the team, but sort of what was that process like?
Yeah, I think we started off with just because we had 10 indicators per set, that's 100 points there, 10 times 10. And then we, increase them or decrease them according to what we thought the focus should be. I mean, we didn't want to lose a few crucial points, but obviously some things were more important than others. There's no science to it, just art.
And I'm sure those workshops are informative to kind of adjust those values.
Right.
So one question on CSAM, so getting into kind of the meat of CSAM methodology. So you mentioned there's a limited amount of processing and value add for tomatoes. So when you're doing the assessment and speaking with stakeholders, is there kind of a stage or component where you're gathering input on sort of what what locals or other stakeholders want to see in new value add products, or what consumers might be seeking? So in the case of the tomato paste, but as you're going through CSAM, is there kind of a way to get that input from maybe products that aren't on the market that people might be seeking within that value chain?
Okay, that's true demand orientation. In a value chain analysis, often you will start at the retailer and you may not actually question shoppers, on what products they want to see. On the CSAM, there is a component on consumer demand. So you can suss that out. A lot of times though, in things like tomatoes, when we visit the grocery stores, you'll see that there are tomato products at the shop. There's tomato paste, there may be dried tomatoes, there will be ketchup, etc. Pick up the bottles and look at who's producing them, if they're being imported or if they're being produced locally or if they're being packaged locally. There's a difference between packaged in Rwanda versus made in Rwanda, right? So that will right away give you a very good sense of, what products are there in the market, what gaps there might be. And then as a project, you can sort of try to catalyze people or encourage people to have more local products. With the Horticulture Innovation Lab, we had a really strong focus on doing the adaptive research or the scientific research behind all of the processing and to just make that available in the country. So we, make protocols for the ketchup and the jams and the chutneys, and we just make that information available, and then entrepreneurs can decide whether they want to introduce a new product, which may not already be in the market. As a project, we don't really say, hey, let's start a new ketchup company. We don't really say that. We say, if somebody wants to start a ketchup company, we can help them do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So it's not very direct.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. And going into post-harvest losses, and I guess back to your Rwanda case when you had that nice graph about quantifying the losses. So can you just talk a bit more about how you went about quantifying those post-harvest losses in terms of, just sheer quantity and value?
Yeah, when you open the CSAM manual, and I'm gonna navigate to that as we talk. We have these questionnaires in there for doing the sampling as you move from the farm to the field. So let me just see if I can open it real quick. So what we do is we go out into the field with these huge weighing scales and quite a bit of equipment and we start measuring, and we have these protocols for how much we need to measure or how many samples we need to take. But what we'll do is like measure the size of the farm and then note like what crop we're looking at. Then we'll start seeing like how much sorting was done, how much is being discarded, what the grading is, what the damage levels is, what the price of the farm gate is. We look at the time of the harvest, we look the day of the harvest, we look at air temperature, relative humidity indicator. There's like a really long list of things that we measure. And then we measure it on the farm, and then we measure it at the next step, which may be at like a collection center or wherever the trader is taking it to. And then we measure it again at the wholesaler market, and then we measure it again at the retail market. And typically we try to get 10 samples at each stage. As you can imagine, this is quite time and resource intensive process, but it gives really good data and really thorough understanding of where the losses are happening and what might be the reason behind these losses. And if you invest in this stage and really understand that, then your programming can really try to get the best bang for your buck. For example, in Rwanda, we realized if we just move people away from 100 kg woven baskets to like 20, 25 kg crates, that's like, we're going to reduce losses by a huge percentage just by doing that.
Yeah.
And that type of visibility would not have come in if we have not measured the amount of losses that you have in these woven baskets and how it increases as you move to the market.
So you mentioned the crates in the case of Rwanda. So this goes into a question about specifically for Rwanda, what intervention do you think helped the most in reducing those post-harvest losses? And did the project invest in that intervention or get private sector to invest in it?
Yeah. I think there's two things that were our cornerstone, or not cornerstone, that impact the most number of farmers. Mm-hmm. One is the in-field trainings. This is the training on how to harvest, which it really includes the maturity indices. And maturity indices is I should have put up a photo of that, but basically you have like 5 photos of tomatoes all the way from green all the way to red, okay? Or the most ripe it can be. And you can grade it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you can have a photo of like number 2 or number 3 where the tomato is like green red or just half-ish, which is called the breaker stage. And you teach the farmers to harvest at that stage versus at the red ripe stage, which is where they currently harvest. And then the problem sort of continues because the traders want to see a red tomato. They don't want to see a green red tomato. So now you have to train the traders, like, please accept these what you think of as raw tomatoes and not ripe tomatoes. When we assure you, they will ripen along the way and you will have more as it moves to the market. So that training is super important. Also gentle handling, with the aprons and with the crates. So the way we did this capacity building of market actors was through our partners. So the project had 3 partners. They were Rwanda Agricultural Board, which is part of the Ministry of Agriculture, NIAB, which is an export body, and University of Rwanda. And the 3 of these in-country partners had training centers. And through those training centers, the training staff, the post-harvest experts, conducted the trainings for different cooperatives and farmers. So that was more of a direct intervention, I would say, but the idea was to do it through in-country partners who are already in the capacity building business. So we created the capacity of these institutions to do post-harvest training, and now they're continuing that training. In the case of the crates, that was entirely facilitation. We facilitated a young entrepreneur to become a marketer of crates. He didn't do production himself. He got another company to produce it. Before that company started producing, we were trying to introduce crates into Rwanda, and we had to import it from neighboring countries, from Uganda and Kenya. So in-country production was really great, helped decrease the price. And then as the project helped, create demand for crates. Like we have to go to the farmers and educate them on the benefits of moving from the woven baskets to the crates, show them the cost-benefit analysis. Crates cost almost $10, and woven baskets cost less than $1. All the same, woven baskets are just like entirely disposable. They're one-time use only, and exactly. Crates are reusable forever. The losses are so much less. Yeah. So there was a lot of our work was in that demand generation and creation, and then feeding that demand to the agribusiness who started to sell crates just initially, so that the whole adoption of crates can sort of move up in the country and be scaled up. Yeah.
And that kind of touches on sort of this essential component of kind of all international activities, which is sustainability. That's always at the forefront of our minds. And so you talked a little bit about best practices around sustainability, but can you kind of elaborate just on kind of components that can help ensure that sustainability within a country will be possible for some of these interventions?
Yeah, so I touched on the example of how we did it for capacity building and for crates. Maybe I can talk about how we did it for cold storage, for example. So Rwanda, again, has like a documented need for cold storage for fruits and vegetables. But there was no real affordable cold storage. So UC Davis has these toolbot powered cold storage technology that they've done a lot of research on, and for about $3,000 to $4,000 we can make a cold storage room. So first we put them in our demo centers, and we're like, okay, so people come and visit, and they're gonna see it, and hopefully they're gonna want to have their own cold storage thing. But what we realize is that more facilitation needs to be done to have more adopters come in. So we worked with other projects as well as cooperatives who would be interested. And then we also created sort of the how should I put it, the technicals people needed to do the maintenance. So we did a training for technicians on how to create these cold rooms, how to install the ACs and the cool bots, and then how to do repair and maintenance. And then we also had a winner in our competition who was a cold storage service provider. So with every intervention, we try to see, okay, so like, what are the barriers to entry or adoption of this intervention? Right. And how can we reduce those barriers without, we don't want to do it ourselves, but what can we do so that other people can come in and do it? Open source technology and low cost appropriate technology is also very important. for this facilitation. Yeah.
Great. Going back to CSAM, this might be in the manual, but are you aware if there's like a minimum number of respondents to kind of employee questionnaires for? I mean, that kind of gets into sample size, but the CSAM has the set of questionnaires that we've discussed a little bit. And so ensuring that you're getting the right level and accuracy of information within the value chain. Have you experienced there being kind of a rough, good number of respondents or stakeholders that should be interviewed?
So the numbers can vary a lot, like between value chain analysis and CSAM. For one crop, you may end up interviewing more than 40 institutions. The way to sort of break it up is to mark off the different actors, the types of actors, and then like specific people within that. So if for your farmers, you may have like 3 different farmer associations or unions you're looking at. For wholesalers, you may only talk to 2 or 3 wholesalers. For financial institutions, you may talk to like 3 MFIs and 2 banks. So it's sort of, like line up all of your functions, I would say value chain functions, and then specific people or institutions within those functions. And then, and I would do it together for value chain and CSAM together, like put everything down in one spreadsheet for, a big list of key informants before you start going out to interview. And then, with that as the question of samples, the in-field samples that we take for measurements, those we typically try to take like 10 samples at each level. Maybe at the wholesaler level, you take a few fewer ones. All of this really goes to, again, like resources, the team you have and the funds you have and the timeline that you have. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And just back to the concept of value chains, it's kind of ingrained in our minds that a value chain is sort of this linear process that's kind of clean and step by step. Whereas if, you showed us that great image of the onion value chain drawing, that was kind of this intricate web of different steps and different players. So in your experience, how often do you feel like value chains for particular crops? Obviously, that's region specific, but how often do you feel like they change? Because I kind of think of them as being, pretty fluid with the market adapting, and new technologies obviously open up new parts of the value chain.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're sort of, again, talking at the intersection of value chain and the market system. And when we, a value chain, the boundaries of the system can entirely be defined by you, right? Like you can just be like, I'm looking at from the input suppliers to the retailer, and I'm going to look at these 3 other business development services provider, and you can have that sort of lens to it, or you can look at the whole market system. And so what is that? It sort of seems like it's everything, because you're looking at, all of the government policies, you're looking at roads and infrastructure, you're looking at different rules and regulations and all the resources that are possible, and really how things are interlinked and how they impact each other. And for a lot of projects, that's a very big scope to look at. So you can't really influence all of that. You have to be like, okay, this is sort of where I'm going to work, but I also recognize that all of these other things affect my area, and having that recognition and planning for that. And the best way to plan for that is to really be dynamic, like pilot something, see what the market forces are telling you, analyze that, and then reiterate and do your next set. Because every time you do something, you will see other players coming in. For example, when we started doing crates with farmers, then we realized, oh, we have to do like work with traders. And then we did trader workshops. Then it's like, oh, we have to do this other thing. So it just, every activity just sort of builds on itself as you take more of these other actors and relationships and roles into the picture.
And
that's the best way.
Yeah,
I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's very helpful.
Yeah.
I just think of, value chains as they can be changing over time and just, how that happens. But
they're constantly evolving. But
right.
The main set of actors, which is I would say the input supply system, the farmers, the traders / aggregators, and the retailer, that really stays the same. That sort of fragmented chain is what will be found in most crops, unless a big agribusiness comes into play, okay? Mm-hmm. And by a big agribusiness, suppose like if you have a mango chain and a big mango juice player comes in, right, and they decide to streamline the whole chain and make sure that like most of the farmers in that region get contracts. They do contract farming, and they are also like prescribing like specific seeds and fertilizers and pesticides. And then if they're able to integrate the chain sort of almost vertically, that's like really, I think, the only time the value chain really changes. It takes a very big, powerful player, right, yeah, to come in and do a lot of work before that happens. But that will still just be one channel. There will always be the informal channel that goes to the local wet markets. Exactly, yeah. These type of changes, they happen over many, many years, right, actually, and you may be able to see them and like map that channel into your value chain. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. We'll take kind of a final question going back to CSAM and just the value chain approach and sort of options for assessments. And so we didn't fully talk about, time frame and cost for doing CSAM, but, do you have any alternatives to value chain assessment to CSAM if that is considered costly or timely? So maybe addressing, roughly the time component and if alternatives exist for doing that.
Okay, so a value chain analysis can be done as a very rapid market analysis of about 2 or 3 weeks, and then a CSAM would take another 3 weeks. In reality, any sort of assessment of this kind can take 3 months from the start of the desk review and like building your assessment team, getting all of your questionnaires, identifying all of your key informants, going out and collecting all the data, running the 2 or 3 workshops that you may need to get everybody in alignment, and then building the recommendations and the report writing and then finalizing that draft. It should normally take 3 months. Okay. Yeah. That would be a reasonable timeline. If you have more money and more time, what you can sort of delve into is the questions relating to seasonality. Most of like tomatoes may be just grown like one time a year. In most sub-Saharan African countries, it'll be, maybe like a rain-fed crop. But if you have time on your hands, you can try to look at it one more time in an off season, because that's when the demand is really high. Mm-hmm. The prices are really high, and if a cluster of farmers somewhere can serve the market at that time, where they may be importing from neighboring countries, then you have a really good opportunity in your hand. So yeah, more time will really just help you longitudinally, I guess. Yeah.
And do you feel like there's options if you have less time for doing value chain assessment, or maybe areas where you might cut a little bit to save some time and money?
Yeah, you can do a good valuation assessment in 3 weeks for
Mhm.
sure, because then you will just build more on your desk research. And if you hear from all of the important actors in the country, which totally can be done in a 2-week interview,
Right.
run, you'll have a very strong understanding of the value chain. Yeah, that's um, also familiarity with horticulture systems like really helps, because relationships do tend to look similar. Like you'll start to see what patterns emerge. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, Rashmi, thank you so much for
Mhm.
your presentation, and thank you to everyone who has joined. We know, again, you've been joining from different countries and time zones, so we greatly appreciate your participation. Just a couple of reminders. So at the end of this session, you'll receive a brief survey. We would greatly appreciate it if you'd complete that and just give us feedback on this webinar, kind of what you learned in the topic, as well as just any feedback that may inform our future webinars. So please remember to take that. Also, a reminder that next week's session is on how to integrate participatory research methods. So we've talked a little bit about that. Rashmi covered some components of that here, and so you'll get a deeper dive into that next week on Thursday, August 8th. And a reminder that we'll post the recording of this webinar, the presentation, as well as any associated resources on the webpage that you see in front of you. So please check back there for updates, as well as links to upcoming webinars that you can register for this series. Thank you again for everyone joining, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.